Going. Hey everybody, Jonathan here. I'm just going to do some demo on the exercises. So if you weren't able to come in for the orientation, I'm just going to show you kind of how to go through some of these exercises. And if you've seen it, then here's a little bit of review for you as well. So first step, actually if you can do this at home and just do it with me, that would be great because then we can go through the movements together. So first step, we're going to go through the squat. Basically what I want you to do is just lift up your knee and find that crease on both sides. And because the start of a squat, a lot of people are used to squatting and bending the knees first, whereas that's a little bit incorrect. We want to start with the hip motion first. So with your fingers where they are, I want you to think about creating that crease in your hip. So the very first motion, without bending your knees at all, push back and create that crease in those hips. So the motion, just go through this a few times, is just sticking the bum back and coming back. So that's the very first step of the squat. Now, once you get that, I want you to imagine, and you can even put a chair behind you, imagine there's a chair, but it's like a foot behind you. So not right behind the feet, but about a foot behind you. So as you reach that bum back, you're reaching the bum back to try and sit back into that chair that's that foot behind you, and then coming back up. So when you're going down and you're reaching back, when you get down to this point, I want you to pause down here and want you to notice two things. Majority of the weight should be distributed in the back of your foot. 70–80% of that weight should be in your heels. And that knee should be behind the line of your toes. If we're here and that you drew a line straight down and came in front of the toes, we're putting a lot of stress on the knees. We're working the quads a lot, but we're not working the glutes very much. So we want to go from this position to this position here, okay? Now, one of the things you'll hear me say is butt back. So butt back is referring to this, knees behind the toes, same thing, weight in the heels. Those all kind of come together. When I say back straight or chest up, I don't necessarily mean to be up here, otherwise we're gonna fall backwards. Okay, when I say chest up, I just wanna be from shoulders rounded to opening the chest. And then we're definitely allowed to lean forward because that's the only way we're gonna stay on the spot without falling over. Because when we lean forward, when we get the hips back far enough, when we lean forward, that counterbalances us so that we have a good, strong position, and then we can keep the back straight in that position as well. So, okay? So that's the big points on the squat. One other thing, two things I see actually is the knees dropping inward, or like as people squat, they drop inward, or I see this, where they're shifted over to one side, okay? So one of the things I want you to think about as you squat is just stand on the spot where you are. Think about like you're pushing into the ground and you're pressing out sideways as if you're trying to split the ground apart between your feet. So almost like I'm trying to do this motion, but my feet aren't actually moving. Just when you do that, make sure you're not lifting the feet up, but you keep it flat and you're pushing out sideways. Or the other option is to think about turning outward. And the biggest thing you'll notice when you do that is that the glutes, your butt starts to turn on a lot more. And then when we do that, we activate both sides evenly, and typically it's gonna prevent some of that knee knocking in, and it's gonna prevent this, it'll get us much straighter. Okay, so that is the squat. Are we gonna keep going? Yep. Okay, so for the lunges, don't worry, I'm just talking to my wife behind the camera, it's all good. For the lunges, we're gonna have one leg forward, one leg back. The ideal foot position for you is when you drop down to the bottom of your squat, that the knees are at 90 degrees, okay? So you wanna be pushing through both feet evenly at about 50% distribution. So we don't wanna be all over the front leg, we wanna be through both legs. And when we do the lunge, I want you to focus on just dropping your back knee straight down. That will prevent us from going forward and having that weight into the toes. So the weight in the front foot here, we want to have it in the heel primarily, and we want to have this knee behind the toe. So if we're coming down here, again, that's a lot of stress on the knees, a lot of work on the quads, not very much on the butt. So we want to shift from here to here. Now both knees are at 90 degrees, that's that ideal position, okay? So when we move that into a stepping lunge, reverse lunge, step back, focus on the back knee dropping down, push through the heel, come back up. Okay, step back, and then. When we think about balance for the lunge, one of the big things that we want to worry about is that people have a tendency to step really narrow and almost like they're walking on a tightrope. So you want to keep the hips, when they're in this position, the hips are wider than the knees, wider than the feet. So when you drop, the other thing that happens is my knee almost drops in. And what this does is putting a lot of stress on the sides of my knee. So what I want you to think about is feet hip width apart. And then as you step, imagine that your feet are attached to train tracks so that as you step, whether it's backwards, you keep a little bit of width in your stance, and then it automatically keeps that knee more in line and because you have a wider base, you're more stable. So even if I do a front lunge, same thing, you want to keep a little bit of width in your stance. Just be careful with the forward lunge that when you step, we don't want that momentum to keep going and that weight to go. You want to step, drop, and then push through the heel to come back, okay? So that's the lunge. Lateral lunge, just a couple points. You want your feet wider than shoulder width. The very first motion of the lateral lunge is the hips going back. Okay, so just like when you did the squat, you want to push, you want to make that crease, so you push the hips back as you shift over to the side. So from here, push the bum back, but I'm shifting over to the side, and I just come up and over, and then over to the other side. Now for this one, if your feet are too wide, what's going to happen is you're going to lunge over to the side, but then your hips are going to be on the inside of your feet. That's going to be a lot of work on your quads, but we're not going to get the glutes very much here. So ideally what we want to do is we want to shorten up that stance a little bit, and then as we drop, I want you to try and think about getting your hip, your knee, and your ankle all stacked up on top of each other in the same line. So if you were, say, right beside a wall, your hip, your knee, and your ankle would all be touching the wall at the same time. Okay? Come down, shift, that gets that stretch, that gets the glutes going. One thing on this too is making sure if I say chest up, it's just opening, it's not coming up here, otherwise again, we're gonna fall over. We can lean forward as long as we keep that back straight, not here. All right, that's the leg stuff. Now we're gonna go into the push-up. The only thing I'm gonna touch on, or two things I'm gonna touch on with the push-up is shoulder position. So most people, they don't quite have the strength to do a push-up, and the first thing that happens is they shrug up, okay? We wanna try and create that gap between the shoulders and the ears. So as I do that, let's just start from the knees. Want to create that gap between the shoulders and the ears as you drop. So as we drop, we don't end up letting the shoulders come up here, but we keep them down, okay? The other thing that happens, what I see a lot, is the hips dropping, okay? And that can put a lot of stress on the low back. If anything, I would rather have your bum up in the air as you do that, like that, if you need an easier version. But ideally, I want you to think about just leading with your chest as you drop into the push-up. So the chest either touches the floor first and then the hips, or at best case scenario, they both touch at the exact same time, okay? The one other thing with the push-up that you need to worry about is just where's your hand position. So a lot of people have a tendency to have the hands out in front of the body and pushing up this way. Ideally what we want to do is keep the hands directly underneath the shoulders there. If you want a really good idea, come down to the bottom of the floor, just find your armpits and just come up slightly wider, and that's our good position there. And you notice my elbows are going back at 45 degrees. That's a much better position for the shoulder than what a lot of people do with the elbows straight out to the side here. That's gonna be a lot harder on the shoulder as opposed to getting those hands underneath the shoulders and then having the arms at 45 degrees. Okay, last one we're gonna go over is the front plank, okay? And so what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna want you to go through this with me and just come onto your forearms, and I want you to notice how much tension you feel in your body as you do this front plank, and if there's any areas of pain or things like that. So where do you feel the tension, and how much tension do you feel as you do that, okay? So now, what I want you to do, I'm gonna break this up into 3 steps, and first step is to start flat on your stomach, and what that's gonna allow you to do is really focus in on the stomach, and ideally take away any lower back pain that you might have had during that. So, first position, elbows directly underneath the shoulders. Create that gap, dropping the shoulders down away from the ears. And then before you do any movement whatsoever, I want you to squeeze your stomach as tight as you can. And then imagine I have a rope wrapped around your hips and I'm slowly squeezing up to that top position. And you just squeeze that as tight as possible, okay? So that's step 1. Step 2 is gonna be doing that. And then as you tighten the stomach, I want you to think about lifting your knees off the ground, squeezing the quads. You're gonna have your feet together and you're gonna squeeze the heels together so you get the glutes really tight. And again, tighten everything, slowly squeeze up and squeeze, 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 squeeze. You're gonna notice, I'm breathing already, that you got a lot of tension built up in the body at that point, and we're just, again, supporting the lower back. Last step, step number 3, is we're gonna incorporate the upper body. So if I'm on the floor like this, your arms are gonna be thinking like they're trying to pull down towards the floor, but they're not physically moving. So if I'm here, I'm gonna be basically trying to pull my elbows towards my toes, but nothing's moving, I'm just holding that position. So again, from the start, tighten the stomach, heels together, squeeze, lift the knees off by squeezing the quads, slowly come up and then pull the elbows towards the toes. And at this point, I'm squeezing every single muscle as tight as I can. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna create a lot more tension in the body. And we're gonna protect that lower back by having all the muscles in the body surrounding that back, helping to support rather than the lower back taking on the grunt or load during the front plank. So that is the 5 exercises we covered during the orientation. So if you weren't able to make it, there's your good breakdown. If you have any questions, let me know. And outside of that, see you guys in boot camp.